Okay, so let's talk a little about cultural diversity. I mean, certainly we've heard this phrase used many times. I think that often it's used a little bit incorrectly, inexactly. When we talk about cultural diversity in America, or especially in urban America today, we seem to focus on particular minority groups, which is not necessarily the whole story of cultural diversity. Cultural diversity, by definition, means there are many different types, and not all cultures are quite as diverse as ours in America. Sweden, for instance, is a very homogeneous community. Finland is a homogeneous community. Some other communities, not European, also would be more homogeneous. But we have a wide range of cultures within our society, and a wide range of different cultures and ethnicities that have within each one, we know that these cultural symbols that we previously talked about are different and have different meanings. And this can come, very often it comes from immigration, and the United States is of course a country full of immigrants. We were built through immigrants, and although the Native Americans are not immigrants, they have a different culture, and although this is not the course to discuss this, at that point they were pushed off and made into, they're forced into being a subculture of their own. But of course the immigration certainly adds to the idea of subculture. I wanted to read to you a quote from a cultural, an ethnic studies scholar who's a Japanese American. His name is Ronald Takaki, and he was on his way to a conference in Norfolk, Virginia. He hails from San Francisco. So he writes like this, and let me read it to you. I had flown from San Francisco to Norfolk and was riding in a taxi to my hotel to attend a conference on multiculturalism. My driver and I chatted about the weather and tourists. The rear view mirror reflected a white man in his 40s. He says to me, "How long have you been in this country?" he asked me. "All my life," I replied, wincing. "I was born in the United States." With a strong southern drawl, he remarked, "I was wondering because your English is excellent." Then, as I had many times before, I explained, "My grandfather came here from Japan in the 1880s. My family has been here in America for over 100 years. He glanced at me in the mirror, and somehow I did not look American to him. My eyes and complexion looked foreign. That's the way Mr. Takiki writes in 1993. And of course, I think there's been many people who experience that. There's some sort of the unaware, there are people who are unaware of the great vast diversity that we have in our culture. But there are other levels that we have in the culture, because there's a general overarching American culture. And this would be a subculture. A culture is a category of people who within the host culture share distinguishing attributes, beliefs, and values, or norms that set them apart in some significant manner from the dominant culture. Now, obviously, you're looking at somebody who belongs to a separate culture, somebody with a big beard and a yarmulke. So I belong to a subculture, because there are different ideas that define me, and different behaviors that define. But there are a lot of other ones. There are a lot of other ones. A subculture might be a subculture of rodeo people. It could be a subculture which is defined by the deaf community, has their own language, for instance. A subculture could be very much separated from the main culture, such as the Old Amish community, which are so completely away from the modern technological American culture that they do not even connect to the modern means of production and modern means of energy. They use horse-drawn carriages, and they produce everything from their own hands. So there are many different types of subcultures that could be defined and are accepted within, in essence, are accepted within the various levels of acceptance within within the host culture. Now, the question of acceptance is really important here, because the question of acceptance and acceptance of the host culture will define whether it is considered a subculture, or on the other hand, a counterculture. Okay? Because a counterculture is a subculture that challenges and does not accept, contradicts parts of the mainstream culture. Okay? There are some that feel really strongly about the overall society, such as would be the gang culture in urban America or throughout America nowadays, that they do not accept the society and they do things which are counter to the society itself, that would undermine the regular workings of society. Hell's Angels, for instance, would do such things. So there are different types of, and some of them are not necessarily, you'd think that countercultures, right away you'd think that these, we're talking about cultures which are out to undermine. Well, actually that's not necessarily true at all. You can have countercultures which are not there to undermine the mainstream culture, okay? Although they don't accept and they will not live by, but they're not out to undermine and to change the host culture. There could be such things as communitarian utopians, right, which are separate groups, separate communities where they live with minimum interference with the larger society, because they think the larger society is immoral in some way, that they're too materialistic, they're too selfish, different ideas. So they pull themselves away and live in a different place. And that would be like the Amish culture, or more some of the more radical Hasidic cultures, or something they just keep themselves away because they don't want to be contaminated by the mainstream host culture. On the other hand, it might be a mystical counterculture, where they're actually looking for truth and for themselves, going to a commune like those who the hippies who retreated into the hippie communes in the 1970s. So they don't really attack society. They just want to stay away from it. They're not even saying that they're better or worse. They're just looking for themselves. And then, of course, we have the idea of the radical activists. But it's not necessarily violent. I mean, if you talk about Martin Luther King, which I'm recording this on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, he was a radical activist in the sociological term. He preached nonviolent resistance, and he tried to actively engage in changing the host culture through nonviolent confrontation. There were people in the same time that, like the people of the Black Panthers, Eldridge Cleaver, who were and Malcolm X, who actually had the same basic goals, but did it through violent, if necessary, actions. So it can be any type of strategy that would work for changing the society, and that would be the idea of the radical activists. So we have the ideas of subcultures, countercultures, and within the countercultures you can have communitarian utopians, mystics, and radical activists.